A man does not fall in love the moment his eyes recognize beauty, nor when his mind admires intelligence, nor even when his heart feels warmth. Those are beginnings, not love. Love begins much deeper, in places most people never examine. The first thing that must align is his inner world. A man can desire a woman, need her, even obsess over her, and still not love her. Love appears only when he is no longer running from himself. When his fears are faced, when his wounds are no longer projected outward, when he stops asking a woman to save him from his own emptiness. If his inner chaos is unresolved, he will use love as an escape. But when his inner life becomes honest, love stops being a distraction and becomes a recognition. He does not cling, he chooses. The second thing that must align is his shadow. Every man carries parts of himself he would rather not see, his weakness, his jealousy, his capacity to destroy what he values. When these parts remain unconscious, they control him. He may love in words, but act in contradiction. Real love appears when he sees these darker parts, and no longer lets them rule his behavior. Then he does not punish a woman for his own insecurity. He does not compete with her strength, or fear her independence. Instead, he respects her because he has made peace with himself. The third thing that must align is meaning. A man loves a woman not only for who she is, but for what she awakens in him. Love becomes real when being with her aligns with his deepest sense of purpose. She is not an accessory to his life, nor a replacement for his ambition. She becomes a mirror that reflects who he is becoming. Through her presence, he feels more responsible, more truthful, more awake. Love, then, is not possession. It is participation in growth. When these three align, his inner world, his shadow, and his sense of meaning, love stops being fragile. It no longer depends on constant reassurance or fear of loss. It becomes steady, grounded, and intentional. This is why true love is rare. It requires inner work before it can be shared outward. A man loves a woman fully only when he has first learned how to stand within himself. A man's capacity to love begins long before he meets the woman he will claim to love. It begins in the private territory of his inner world, a place shaped by childhood impressions, unspoken fears, unmet needs, and silent beliefs about himself. If this inner world is chaotic, fragmented, or avoided, love cannot take root there. It may appear as attraction, attachment, or dependency, but it will lack depth. A man who has not confronted himself will approach a woman not as an equal presence, but as a solution to an internal problem he has not named. Most men are taught to look outward for fulfillment. Achievement, approval, control, and conquest become substitutes for self-understanding. When such a man enters a relationship, he brings this outward hunger with him. He expects the woman to regulate his emotions, validate his worth, and soothe his anxieties. What he calls love is often a negotiation between his needs and her availability. His inner instability leaks into the relationship as jealousy, emotional withdrawal, or quiet resentment. He does not love her as she is. He loves what she provides to his unsettled inner state. Stability within does not mean perfection or emotional numbness. It means awareness. A man begins to love when he recognizes his patterns instead of acting them out blindly. He notices how he reacts when he feels abandoned, challenged, or unseen. He becomes curious about his own emotional responses rather than ashamed of them. This curiosity creates space. In that space, his reactions slow down and choice becomes possible. Love cannot exist where everything is automatic. It requires the freedom to respond consciously rather than defensively. When a man faces his inner world, he begins to separate the past from the present. He stops confusing a woman with the figures who once disappointed or controlled him. Many relationships fail not because of what is happening now, but because old emotional memories are being replayed in a new form. A man who has not examined himself will argue with a woman as if she were someone else entirely. His anger will be larger than the moment deserves. His fear will feel disproportionate. Inner alignment allows him to see what belongs to now and what belongs to then. This alignment also changes how he experiences solitude. A man who is at war with himself fears being alone. He stays in relationships out of panic rather than connection. But when his inner world becomes more stable, solitude no longer threatens him. He can be alone without collapsing inward. This is crucial, because love chosen from stability is very different from love chosen from fear. When he does not need a woman to complete him, he can finally meet her without burden. Emotional honesty with oneself is one of the hardest disciplines. It requires admitting weakness without dramatizing it and strength without arrogance. A man who does this work no longer needs to perform masculinity. He does not confuse emotional suppression with control. He understands that feelings ignored do not disappear. They wait. By allowing himself to feel without being ruled by emotion, he gains inner authority. This authority is felt by a woman as safety, not dominance. Inner alignment also reshapes responsibility. A man stops blaming circumstances, partners, or fate for his emotional state. He recognizes his role in the dynamics he participates in. This recognition is not self-punishment, it is empowerment. When he takes responsibility for his inner life, he no longer needs to control the outer one. Love flourishes in this shift because control suffocates connection, while responsibility invites trust. A man who has not aligned his inner world often confuses intensity with intimacy. He believes love must be dramatic, painful, or uncertain to feel real. Calm feels boring to him because chaos is familiar. Inner work breaks this addiction to emotional turbulence. He begins to recognize peace not as emptiness, but as depth. In this state, love does not need to hurt to feel meaningful. Presence becomes enough. As his inner world stabilizes, his expectations change. He no longer expects a woman to constantly reassure him or adapt herself to his moods. He becomes more consistent because he is less fragmented. His words begin to match his actions, not because he is forcing integrity, but because contradiction has lost its function. This consistency is one of the quiet foundations of love, rarely spoken about, yet deeply felt. A man aligned within also gains the ability to truly see a woman. Without the fog of unmet needs clouding his perception, he notices her reality rather than his fantasy. He listens without immediately translating her words into threats or demands. He can tolerate difference without interpreting it as rejection. This tolerance is not indifference, it is maturity. Love requires the strength to allow the other to remain other. This inner alignment does not happen once and end. It is a continual process of reflection, correction, and humility. Each relationship reveals new layers of the self. A man who commits to this process does not become flawless, but he becomes grounded. His love becomes less about taking and more about meeting. Less about being saved and more about sharing a life from a place of inner solidity, where his emotions are known, his reactions examined, his fears acknowledged, and his presence offered without disguise. Desire often announces itself loudly, while love speaks quietly. A man may feel pulled toward a woman with great intensity, yet this pull alone says very little about love. Much of what is called desire is driven by unconscious fears that have not yet found language. These fears operate beneath awareness, shaping attraction, behavior, and attachment. Until they are brought into the light, they rule from the shadows. A man loves only when these hidden forces loosen their grip on him. Unconscious fear is rarely experienced as fear. It disguises itself as jealousy, control, avoidance, or obsession. A man may believe he is deeply attached to a woman, when in truth he is terrified of abandonment. He may call it passion, when it is actually anxiety. He may call it loyalty when it is dependence. As long as these fears remain unnamed, his actions will contradict his intentions. He may speak of love while behaving in ways that erode trust and safety. Many men are unaware of how early emotional experiences shape their adult relationships. The fear of not being enough, of being replaced, of losing control, or of being emotionally exposed often originates long before adulthood. When these fears remain unconscious, a man reacts to a woman not as she is, but as a symbol of an old threat. His nervous system responds as if something vital is at stake. In this state, love becomes impossible because survival has taken over. When fear dominates, desire becomes urgent. A man wants closeness immediately, reassurance constantly, certainty without patience. He may rush intimacy or withdraw suddenly, both driven by the same inner panic. This urgency feels intense, even intoxicating, but it lacks stability. Love cannot grow where fear demands constant proof. It needs time, presence, and trust, all of which fear resists. The process of bringing fear into consciousness is uncomfortable. It requires a man to pause instead of react, to observe instead of justify. He begins to ask why certain moments trigger disproportionate emotion, why a small disagreement feels like rejection, why independence feels threatening, why silence feels unbearable. These questions weaken fear's hold because what is seen clearly loses its power to manipulate. As fear becomes conscious, desire changes its texture, it slows down, it becomes less possessive and more appreciative. A man no longer feels compelled to secure the woman in order to calm himself. He can tolerate uncertainty without collapsing into suspicion. He can allow space without interpreting it as abandonment. This tolerance marks the transition from need-driven attachment to genuine affection. Unconscious fear often drives a man to seek control over the relationship, over the woman's choices, over the future. He may call this protection or commitment, but beneath it lies the terror of losing emotional ground. When fear is faced, control becomes unnecessary. He understands that love cannot be guaranteed by force. The more he tries to contain it, the more it slips away. A man who becomes aware of his fears stops demanding that a woman carry the weight of his emotional regulation. He no longer expects her to constantly reassure his worth or prove her loyalty. He begins to self-soothe, not by suppressing fear, but by understanding it. This inner shift changes how he relates. His presence becomes calmer, his reactions less volatile. Love thrives in this calm because it feels safe rather than conditional. Desire ruled by fear seeks confirmation. Love freed from fear offers recognition. The difference is subtle but profound. In desire, a man asks, "Do you want me? Do you need me? Will you stay?" In love, he asks, "Who are you? And how do we meet each other honestly?" One seeks to fill a gap, the other seeks to share a reality. When fear is unconscious, a man often idealizes a woman. He places her on a pedestal, projecting onto her the qualities he believes will save him from his inner unease. This idealization is unstable. The moment she fails to live up to the image, disappointment turns into resentment. Conscious fear dismantles this illusion. He begins to see her as human, complex, imperfect, and real. Only then can love replace fantasy. Facing fear also allows a man to stay present during conflict. Instead of withdrawing or attacking, he can remain engaged. He understands that disagreement is not annihilation. Emotional discomfort no longer feels fatal. This capacity to stay present is one of the clearest signs that desire has matured into love. Love is not the absence of conflict, but the ability to move through it without losing oneself or the other. As unconscious fears lose dominance, a man's nervous system settles. He is no longer constantly scanning for signs of loss or betrayal. This inner settling creates emotional availability. He listens more fully, responds more thoughtfully, and speaks more truthfully. Love requires this availability. Without it, even the strongest attraction remains shallow. When fear no longer drives his behavior, a man's commitment becomes cleaner. It is no longer fueled by anxiety or the need to secure emotional safety. It becomes a choice rather than a defense. He stays not because he is afraid to leave, but because he wants to be present. This distinction changes everything. Desire anchored in fear demands, while love grounded in awareness offers. The quiet transformation from fear-driven desire to conscious love does not announce itself dramatically. It reveals itself in consistency, patience, and emotional steadiness. A man no longer feels the need to test love or provoke reactions to reassure himself. He trusts the bond because he trusts his capacity to face discomfort without losing his center. In this state, love is no longer a strategy to avoid pain, but a way of relating that arises from inner clarity, where fear is seen, named, and no longer allowed to steer the heart blindly. Every man carries within him a hidden landscape made of traits he learned to suppress, deny, or judge as unacceptable. These traits do not disappear when ignored. They sink below awareness and form what quietly shapes behavior from behind the scenes. When these hidden aspects remain unseen, they emerge indirectly through blame, aggression, withdrawal, or contradiction. A man may believe he is acting out of love, yet his actions reveal something unresolved moving beneath the surface. This hidden side is often formed early. Strength that was punished becomes secrecy. Vulnerability that was shamed becomes emotional distance. Desire that was judged becomes guilt or excess. Over time, a man builds an image of who he thinks he must be, while the disowned parts wait patiently in the background. They gather energy. When relationships grow intimate, these parts press forward, demanding recognition. Love becomes the arena where the unacknowledged self seeks expression. When a man has not integrated this hidden side, he projects it outward. He sees in a woman what he cannot tolerate in himself. Her independence feels threatening because it mirrors his own suppressed autonomy. Her emotional needs feel overwhelming because they reflect his own unmet needs. He reacts strongly not because of her behavior alone, but because something inside him has been touched. Projection allows him to avoid responsibility while remaining trapped by the very traits he denies. Love cannot survive long under projection. A woman becomes a screen for unresolved inner conflict. She is blamed for emotions she did not create. She is expected to manage dynamics she does not control. Over time, exhaustion replaces connection. The relationship becomes a battlefield between what is conscious and what is hidden. A man who truly loves must eventually turn inward and ask what part of himself he has been avoiding. Integrating this hidden side does not mean indulging every impulse or abandoning values. It means acknowledging the full range of one's inner reality without moral distortion. A man learns to say, "This is also part of me," without being ruled by it. Anger is recognized without becoming violence. Desire is admitted without becoming compulsion. Fear is allowed without becoming paralysis. This acknowledgement restores inner balance. As integration begins, emotional reactions lose their intensity. What was once explosive becomes informative. Instead of acting out jealousy, a man recognizes insecurity. Instead of withdrawing in silence, he notices shame. This shift from action to awareness is transformative. Awareness dissolves the need for unconscious expression. The energy once spent on defense becomes available for connection. A man who has faced his hidden aspects stops demanding perfection from a woman. He no longer expects her to embody purity, consistency, or emotional stability he has not achieved himself. He understands contradiction because he has seen it within. This understanding creates compassion rather than judgment. Love deepens because it is no longer based on illusion. Integration also changes power dynamics. A man who has not met his hidden side often seeks dominance or submission as a way to manage inner conflict. Control becomes a substitute for self-understanding. When he integrates these aspects, power loses its urgency. He does not need to overpower or disappear. He can stand firmly while remaining open. This balance creates a relational presence that feels grounded rather than reactive. Many relationships fail not due to lack of affection, but due to unintegrated inner material leaking into behavior. A man may sabotage closeness because intimacy threatens to expose parts he has hidden even from himself. He may create distance just as connection deepens. Integration reduces this self-sabotage. When there is nothing left to hide internally, closeness becomes less frightening. Facing these inner aspects also allows a man to tolerate emotional complexity in a woman. He does not demand simplicity or constant harmony. He understands that conflicting emotions can coexist. This tolerance is a sign of maturity. Love does not require emotional purity. It requires emotional capacity. Capacity grows when inner contradictions are acknowledged rather than denied. As integration progresses, responsibility replaces blame. A man begins to see his emotional reactions as information rather than justification for behavior. He can say, "This reaction is mine to understand," instead of making it someone else's burden. This shift transforms conflict into dialogue. Love becomes a shared exploration rather than a struggle for moral superiority. A man who has integrated his hidden side becomes more trustworthy, not because he is flawless, but because he is honest. His partner senses this honesty even when words are few. There is less unpredictability because fewer forces operate unconsciously. His presence becomes coherent. What he feels, thinks, and does align more naturally. This coherence is deeply stabilizing in love. Integration also restores vitality. The parts of the self that were suppressed often contain creativity, assertiveness, and emotional depth. When reclaimed, these qualities enrich the relationship. Love becomes more alive, more expressive, more resilient. It is no longer constrained by fear of self-exposure. Without integration, love remains fragile. It depends on the woman maintaining an image that keeps hidden parts asleep. This is an impossible demand. With integration, love becomes flexible. It can survive disappointment, disagreement, and change because it is rooted in inner wholeness rather than denial. A man who integrates his hidden aspects no longer needs to escape himself through relationships. He enters love not to complete a missing piece, but to share a self that has been examined, accepted, and unified. In this state, love is no longer a struggle against inner forces, but an expression of inner alignment where nothing essential is split off, denied, or forced into the shadows, and connection arises from the courage to see oneself fully and remain present within that truth. A man's love reaches its fullest expression only when it aligns with meaning. Without meaning, relationships drift into habit, dependency, or distraction. A woman may be desired, admired, even deeply cared for, yet something remains unsettled if the connection does not resonate with a man's deeper sense of direction. Meaning is not ambition alone, nor social expectation, nor personal fantasy. It is the quiet sense that one's life is moving toward coherence, that actions and values are not in conflict, that existence feels purposeful rather than accidental. When a man lacks meaning, he often seeks it unconsciously through relationships. He hopes a woman will give his life structure, motivation, or identity. In this state, love becomes a substitute for purpose. The relationship must carry the weight of his fulfillment, which no human bond can sustain for long. Pressure builds silently, expectations multiply. Disappointment becomes inevitable, not because the woman has failed, but because meaning cannot be borrowed, it must be lived. When meaning is present, love changes shape. A man no longer looks to a woman to define his life, but to walk alongside him as he defines it himself. She is not a destination, but a companion. Her presence does not replace his direction, it complements it. This alignment creates a different quality of commitment. He does not stay because he is lost without her, but because being with her feels consistent with who he is becoming. Meaning also anchors a man during difficulty. Relationships inevitably encounter tension, uncertainty, and change. Without meaning, these moments feel pointless and exhausting. With meaning, struggle is placed within a larger context. A man understands why he is choosing to stay engaged rather than withdraw. He sees challenge not as a threat to love, but as part of a shared path. This perspective gives love endurance. A woman often senses whether she is connected to a man's deeper purpose or merely filling a void. When she aligns with his meaning, she feels included rather than used. Her presence matters not because she stabilizes his emotions, but because she resonates with his values. This resonance creates mutual respect. Love becomes less about constant affirmation and more about shared direction. Meaning also shapes sacrifice. A man sacrifices easily for what he finds meaningful. Without meaning, sacrifice breeds resentment. He feels he is giving up parts of himself without understanding why. When love aligns with meaning, sacrifice feels voluntary rather than imposed. He does not keep score. He gives because the relationship fits into a life he consciously chooses. A man aligned with meaning does not confuse intensity with significance. He understands that loud emotion is not proof of depth. Meaning introduces patience. He can tolerate phases where passion is quieter because the relationship is rooted in something more stable than mood. This steadiness allows love to mature rather than burn itself out. When love aligns with meaning, responsibility deepens. A man recognizes that his choices affect not only his own life, but the shared life he is building. He becomes more careful with words, more deliberate with actions. This care is not fear-driven. It arises naturally from understanding that what he is part of matters. Meaning makes love ethical rather than impulsive. A man's sense of meaning also protects love from stagnation. As he grows, his understanding of himself evolves. When a woman aligns with his deeper values rather than a fixed identity, the relationship adapts. She is not threatened by his growth, nor does she feel abandoned by it. Growth becomes shared rather than divisive. Love remains alive because it is connected to movement rather than preservation. Without meaning, relationships often collapse under boredom or restlessness. A man feels something is missing, but cannot articulate it. He may seek novelty, distance, or escape. With meaning, restlessness is recognized as a signal to realign rather than to flee. Love becomes a place where reflection occurs, not avoidance. Meaning also refines choice. A man becomes more selective, not out of fear, but clarity. He understands that not every connection deserves permanence. When he chooses a woman, the choice carries weight. It is informed by values rather than impulse. This depth of choice gives love gravity. It is felt not as excitement alone, but as seriousness without heaviness. When love aligns with meaning, a man's presence becomes more grounded. He listens differently, he speaks with intention, he does not promise lightly, nor does he disappear under pressure. His actions form a pattern that reflects inner coherence. This coherence is one of the strongest foundations of lasting love. A man whose love is aligned with meaning does not need constant reassurance that the relationship matters. He feels its importance through lived consistency. He invests time, attention, and effort without dramatic gestures. Love expresses itself in reliability. This reliability creates trust, not because it is demanded, but because it is demonstrated. Ultimately, love that aligns with meaning transcends personal satisfaction. It becomes part of a life narrative that feels authentic. A man experiences the relationship as something that belongs in his life story, not as a detour or distraction. Love feels necessary not in a desperate sense, but in a truthful one, where being with this woman feels aligned with the deepest reasons he wakes up, chooses, endures, and continues forward with intention, awareness, and a sense that his life with her present makes internal sense without contradiction.